Welcome to The Critique. Today we are reviewing a transcript from Solace Fox titled If You're Seeing This, Your Moment Has Already Started, which is a motivational monologue arguing that personal confusion and chaos are actually signs of an already active spiritual transformation. Let's jump straight into the first focus area, which is structure and flow.
Sounds good.
The current structure operates as a continuous stream of consciousness, which risks exhausting the listener before they reach the resolution.
Exhausting is definitely the right word there. I mean, it's a really fascinating piece because the energy is just undeniable. But when you look at the text on the page, it reads like a wall of intensity.
Yeah, it really does.
It starts at a 10 and it just stays at a 10. From the very opening line about that strange sensation in your chest, all the way through the metaphors about wrecking balls, right down to the final command to choose now. The emotional pitch never drops. It's just relentless.
And as I understand it from looking at the text, the argument here is that without breaks, the actual message gets lost.
Exactly. It becomes a physiological issue for the audience. We're asking the listener to process these incredibly heavy existential concepts. Ideas like your soul is done settling or renovation looks like destruction.
Right.
These aren't light ideas. They are massive paradigm shifts. But because the text lacks landing pads or distinct movements, the audience is basically forced to sprint a marathon.
Because they've been hit with the symptoms, the metaphor, and the instructions all in one single breath.
Right. It blurs the lines completely. We move from the symptoms of change, like waking up at odd hours, the unexpected contacts, straight into this very heavy renovation metaphor, and then immediately into actionable advice about gentle experiments.
Yeah, it's a lot all at once.
There is a real risk that focusing solely on the feeling of momentum forces the listener to gloss over the nuance. They just aren't given the space to process one heavy concept before they're hit with the next one.
I can definitely see what you're going for here. Let's look at how we can strengthen this. The suggestion is to structure the monologue into 3 distinct, clearly signaled acts, which would be the diagnosis, the mechanism, and the prescription.
That structure is vital for pacing. If we break this down, Act 1, the diagnosis, needs to be a dedicated container for all those scattered symptoms. Currently, the text scatters them quite a bit. We have waking up at 3 a.m. in one paragraph, and then the taste of ashes in your mouth in another paragraph entirely.
Right, it's disjointed.
Let's group these. Create a distinct section that essentially says, here is the physical and emotional evidence.
And effectively, that validates the listener's experience before trying to explain it to them.
Precisely. And crucially, you have to end that first section with a hard stop, a rhetorical pause, a bridge phrase like, if this is you, here is why. That signals to the listener, okay, we are done listing symptoms. Now take a breath. We are moving to the cause.
Which naturally leads us right into Act 2, the mechanism.
Yeah, this is where we isolate that really powerful wrecking ball and renovation metaphor. The text mentions that you've been in boot camp, which is a fantastic image. We should dedicate this specific section to explaining why the transformation actually hurts.
So separating the pain from the process.
Exactly. We separate the pain of the symptoms from the logic of the transformation. This is the meaty part of the script, really the intellectual core.
And then finally, we land on Act 3, the prescription.
And this is probably the most important structural shift. We really need to move the advice about gentle experiments and trusting the pull to a distinct final section. And the tone here needs to shift dramatically.
How so?
Well, if Acts 1 and 2 are heavy, intense, and explanatory, Act 3 should feel lighter. It should be faster paced, more hopeful. It should feel like the cool down after a really intense workout. By separating it, you allow the emotional arc to resolve naturally rather than just abruptly stopping.
So by segmenting it, you're allowing the listener to actually digest the why before they are asked to do the what. That makes perfect sense. Moving on to our second lens, let's look closely at the use of imagery used throughout the piece.
Great, let's do it.
While the metaphorical imagery is evocative, the piece relies so heavily on abstraction that it risks feeling disconnected from the audience's actual lived daily experience.
That is a highly critical observation. I was reading through this, and the writing is undeniably beautiful. I mean, we have invisible doors cracking open, artificial sweetener, wrecking balls, wearing someone else's clothes. It is genuinely poetic.
But is there a risk that focusing solely on these metaphors might overlook the gritty reality of the listener's life? The text describes feelings about life,
but it doesn't actually describe life itself.
And the risk there is that a more practical listener might just completely tune out.
Exactly. A listener who is practical-minded, maybe an engineer, a busy parent, someone stressing about a mortgage. They might dismiss this as woo-woo or just spiritual fluff because it doesn't describe a specific real-world scenario.
Right, it's too detached. It mentions a job feeling suffocating, which is still an abstract feeling. It mentions friendships feeling hollow. These are adjectives. They aren't scenes. We really need to ground this.
Okay, so what I really like about this critique is that it doesn't ask the writer to remove the poetry, but to support it. The suggestion here is to anchor the metaphors with one or two specific, slice-of-life, micro-narratives to really ground the abstract concept.
Building on that point, let's look at it from the perspective of cinematic detail. Instead of just saying that job that once felt secure suddenly feels suffocating, which is the current text, let's add a visceral detail.
Like what?
How about it's that moment at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when you look at a spreadsheet and feel a cold dread in your stomach?
Oh, wow, yeah. That is instantly relatable. It puts the listener in a chair, in a room, at a very specific time.
It really does. You can almost hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. It validates the abstract feeling of suffocation with the concrete reality. And we can do the exact same thing for the relationships. The text says friendships that seem solid now feel hollow.
Which is fine, but a bit vague.
It's nice, but let's sharpen it. Describe a specific scenario. It's sitting at dinner with old friends, hearing the same jokes you've heard for 10 years, and realizing you have absolutely nothing to say to them anymore.
That completely transforms a concept into a memory. It's painful because it's so real.
Exactly. It punches you right in the gut. And for the environment, the text says environments make your shoulders tense. Let's replace that with a very concrete setting. It's the way your body locks up the second you pull into your office parking garage.
Yes.
Suddenly, the wrecking ball metaphor isn't just a pretty idea. It's the only logical response to that parking garage dread. It validates the metaphor with reality.
That creates a much stronger bridge between the writer's intent and the reader's reality. It proves the writer actually understands the pain, not just the philosophy behind it. Let's shift gears now to the actionable advice provided in the latter half of the script.
Okay.
The call to action relies on generic suggestions that don't match the profundity of the problem being diagnosed.
This is where I felt the absolute biggest disconnect in the whole piece. The script diagnoses a massive, earth-shattering existential crisis. It says your soul is finally done settling, your internal structure is being renovated, and you are shedding an old skin.
Huge concepts.
This is huge, heavy stuff. But then, the solutions offered are, well, they're a bit cliché.
Like take that class or have that conversation.
Right, spend a Saturday doing something. There is a huge mismatch between the intensity of the renovation, which is literally the destruction of one's life structure, and the lightness of the solution. It feels completely unbalanced.
And it undermines the severity of the setup.
It does. And the advice to trust the pull is lovely, but is it actually useful? If I am in chaos, as the text suggests, my internal compass is spinning. I don't know what the pull is. I'm just trying to survive the day.
Right. It feels like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. The suggestion here is to replace the generic list of actions with a specific framework for experimentation that creates a tangible metric for the user.
That's a fascinating way to approach it, because what are the potential limitations of saying take a class? Well, it requires you to know what class to take in the first place. So instead of saying notice what drains you, let's suggest an energy audit.
An energy audit.
Tell the listener, for 1 week, keep a note on your phone, mark a plus when you feel light and a minus when you feel heavy. Trust the data. That is concrete, it's a literal tool.
It turns trusting your intuition into data collection, which is so much more approachable for a skeptical mind.
Precisely, it removes the mysticism and replaces it with observation. And we can refine the gentle experiments concept too. Instead of the generic take a class, let's suggest a low-stakes fail.
I like the sound of that.
The instruction could be do something this week specifically because you might be bad at it, just to prove the world won't end. That addresses the underlying fear of the renovation rather than just filling time with a new hobby.
I really like that. It speaks to the psychological barrier rather than just the activity itself. It attacks the perfectionism that usually accompanies this kind of existential crisis.
And one more thing on this point. The text talks a lot about uncertainty. We should clarify that with a specific rule for decision-making. Something like, if the only reason you are staying is fear of what comes next, you have already left. Acknowledge that.
Wow.
That pierces through the confusion so much more effectively than just saying, trust the process.
That is a really powerful reframe. It gives the listener a diagnostic tool they can use immediately. It forces a real confrontation with the truth. Finally, let's look closely at the section discussing the rhetorical style and the audience relation.
Let's do it.
The text relies heavily on Barnum statements, which are vague generalizations that could apply to anyone, and this actually dilutes the feeling of personal insight.
Yes, the Barnum effect. It's that horoscope style of writing. Phrases like, "You've been feeling it, haven't you?" Or, "Most people spend their lives waiting." The text essentially relies on the reader projecting their own specific misery onto these very vague sentences.
Right.
And while that works to a degree, it creates a binary.
The binary being that you are either numbing yourself or you are awakening?
Correct. It assumes the reader is in a very specific state of dramatic misery, that their goals taste like ashes. But is there a risk that focusing solely on this dramatic crisis might overlook the people who are just simply bored?
That's a great point.
It risks alienating a listener who isn't in a tear-filled crisis, but is just experiencing a low-level hum of dissatisfaction. If I'm not feeling like my life is being hit by a wrecking ball, I might think this video simply isn't for me.
I can definitely see what you're going for here. The suggestion is to acknowledge the spectrum of dissatisfaction, to make the piece feel more inclusive and intellectually honest.
Exactly. We need to widen the net. We can add a qualifier to the script. Something like, "This might not look like a breakdown. It might just look like boredom. It might look like everything is fine on paper, but fine has started to feel like a trap."
Fine has started to feel like a trap that catches the person who is numb, not just the person who is actively hurting.
That's a crucial distinction. Fine as a trap resonates with a completely different demographic than ashes in your mouth. It catches the high performer who has won the game but hates the prize.
It does. It brings a whole new layer of audience into the fold.
And we can also challenge the listener more directly. The text currently validates them a lot. It says things like, "You won't be one of those people, and I know this because you're still reading."
It's a bit flattering.
It's very flattering. It's a bit soft. Let's flip it. Instead of just validation, let's ask a genuinely hard question. Are you willing to be the villain in someone else's story to be the hero in your own? Because that is what this requires.
That raises the stakes significantly.
It moves from "you're special for reading this" to "are you brave enough to actually do this?" It treats the listener like an adult capable of making a hard choice, rather than a victim who just needs comfort. It respects the audience more.
It shifts the tone from purely comforting to constructively challenging, which aligns so much better with the boot camp metaphor mentioned earlier in the piece.
And frankly, it makes the rearranging universe part feel earned. If you're asking them to make hard choices, the reward of the universe aligning feels like an actual payoff, not just magic. It makes the transformation active, not passive.
To recap, we've covered a lot of ground today on how to sharpen this monologue. First, we discussed structuring the emotional arc by breaking the stream of consciousness into 3 distinct acts: diagnosis, mechanism, and prescription. We prevent the listener from burning out and give the heavy concepts actual time to land.
Right.
Second, we looked at grounding the metaphor. We want to move away from purely abstract imagery, like invisible door, and anchor the piece with visceral, slice-of-life detail, like the specific dread of a spreadsheet at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Absolutely essential.
Third, we addressed the specificity of action. We need to replace generic advice like "take a class" with concrete frameworks like the energy audit or the low-stakes fail to match the intensity of the problem with the actual utility of the solution.
Yes.
And finally, we talked about avoiding the Barnum effect by acknowledging that transformation can look like boredom, not just crisis, and by challenging the listener with hard questions about being the villain in someone else's story, we make the piece more honest and engaging.
Spot on.
This is a strong piece with a powerful core message, and with these structural and tonal adjustments, it can go from being simply motivational to being truly transformational. We invite the listener to submit their revised draft back in for a follow-up look.